Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Marked twice, loved once. Episode 14. Chapter 154. Nora's POV. I could see the shock in Julius's eyes when he heard what Madison said to him. He couldn't believe his ears and looked at Madison with disbelief. "My father? Are you my father?" he asked, and Madison nodded. He walked closer, and I stepped aside for him. He cupped Julius's face and looked into his eyes. "Yes, son. I'm your father," he replied and kissed his forehead. "I'm sorry I haven't been in your life all this while. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry I've been so far away from you. I'm so sorry, but I promise to make it all up to you. I sincerely promise this to you," he said as he planted more kisses on Julius's head. Julius looked at me with confusion in his eyes. He was puzzled, in total disbelief, and seemed to need more clarifications. "Mom, is he telling the truth? Is he truly my father?" he asked with curiosity in his eyes. I was silent for a while before I took a deep breath, looked at everyone around me, and returned my attention to him. "Yes, he is your father, Julius," I finally confessed, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He was furious, and he looked at me for a while before he could open his mouth to talk. "Thought you said he is not my father? Have you forgotten that you even swore that he is not my dad? I asked you several times, but you stopped me and told me to forget about it, that he isn't my father. What changed now? Why is he suddenly my father?" he asked me, anger obvious in his voice. I felt troubled. I shouldn't have taken it so far back then, but I needed to explain myself first. "I'm sorry, Julius. I just did not know how to tell you then. I was under so much pressure, and I was angry too. I hope you understand, right?" I asked him, but he shook his head, still disappointed. "No, Mom. Stop with your explanations. Why did you lie? Why did you tell me so many lies instead of the truth? You know what I've been through. You knew what I went through back in London without a father. My friends would talk about their fathers, bring gifts that their fathers bought for them to school, and say things about how caring their fathers were, but I had nothing to say because I had no father. On Father's Day, everyone else would bring their fathers to school, play games, go to parks, and do a lot of fun things, but I never had such an experience with my father. Why? I even thought I had no father. I thought he was dead, but he is alive. He is so healthy that he could create all those memories with me, so why did you keep him away? Why did you make me go through all those lonely moments when you knew how hard it was for me? Why?" Julius said to me with tears in his eyes. He was so pained that I could see his lips trembling, and I felt hurt. My heart clenched, and I felt guilty. I had no idea he would be this hurt, and I felt bad for him. "I'm sorry, my baby. I wouldn't have done that if there wasn't a reason. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." I tried to act cool while pleading with him. I tried my best not to cry in front of my son, while I also hoped he would forgive me. "I don't want to hear it, Mom. I don't want to hear your apology anymore because it doesn't sound real. Your plea doesn't sound genuine. You are wicked, Mom. You are so wicked that even my pains can never move you. You are very wicked," he said to me, and it was like 1,000 needles were thrown into my heart, creating holes. The pain was unbearable, and my eyes became moist with tears. "I'm sorry," I mumbled softly to myself, as I couldn't afford to anger him anymore. He was crying so hard. A doctor entered and walked to us. "What's going on here?" he asked, and we all turned to face him. He looked at our faces and sighed. "You should all let him be for now, please. He is not strong enough to go through this at the moment. Please, stop now." The doctor pleaded, and we nodded. I turned to face Julius, who stared back at me. "I'm sorry, Julius. I really am," I said, but he looked away. "Please leave. I don't want to see you. Just leave, Mom," he said, and my heart sank. As he said, "Please leave, Madam. We can't afford to stress him at this state," the doctor said to me, and I nodded. I glanced at him one more time and walked out of the room, with Maxwell following me. I walked to a seat in front of Julius's ward and sat on it. Tears rolled down my eyes, and I couldn't stop myself. The tears were choking me, and the pain in my heart was much. I felt guilty and regretted some of my actions. "It's okay, Nora. It's okay. Julius is a kid, and he will soon be over it. He is just angry after all," he said to me, but I shook my head. No one knew my son as much as I did, and I knew when he completely lost it. "You don't know Julius, Maxwell. You don't know him at all. Julius doesn't act like a kid. He is not the type to talk like the other kids or act like them. He is way more mature than his age. His talking to me that way meant that he is really angry, and he won't forgive me so soon. My son is disappointed in me, and he hates me so much right now," I replied, as more tears rolled down my eyes. I felt so sad that I wished this was all a bad dream, and I wanted to wake up from it quickly. I was still crying and lamenting to Maxwell when the door opened, revealing Madison and Alpha Leo. I stood up from my seat and rushed over to stand in front of Madison. "How is he? How is my son?" I asked, staring at his face. "Has he calmed down? Has he forgiven me?" I asked many questions at a time, hoping my son would be okay already. Madison stared at me for a while and looked away. "Don't talk to me. I don't want to talk to you either," he said, still not looking at me, and I was confused. I had no idea what to do. How would I be able to apologize to my son when I could not even meet him because he refused to see me again? What would I do? "I'm leaving now, but I will be back. I want to go and freshen up," Madison said to Maxwell and walked past me. I watched him leave without saying anything, until Alpha Leo walked toward me and cleared his throat, seemingly to get my attention. "I have to leave now too. I must finalize my business deal today, but I will be back when I'm done," he said, and I looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Okay. Thank you very much," I said to him, and he hugged me. "It's okay. Everything will be okay. Your son will be fine, and he will come back to you. Be strong and hang in there," he comforted me, and I nodded, unable to say a word even after he broke the hug and left. I was left alone with Maxwell, and I sat back in my seat. I had a lot to think about. There were so many things that were going wrong, and it was terrifying. A doctor came out of Julius's ward and walked over to me. "He is okay now, but it will be better if you stay away from him for now," he said to me, and I raised my head to look at him without saying a word. "Also, I think you should go home and rest. Nurses are here, and they will take good care of him. You should freshen up and rest for now," the doctor advised, and I agreed. Maxwell stood up and turned to face me. "Let's go," he said, and I nodded. We got home, and Maxwell led me into the house. My eyes were heavy, I was completely exhausted, but tears wouldn't stop running down my face. "It's okay, Nora," I had heard these words from Maxwell 1,000 times already, but I wished it had come from either Julius or Madison instead, as that would have comforted me better. I walked toward my room while regretting and wishing I had told Julius the truth from the beginning. "You caused this yourself, Nora. You never listened to my advice," Lolita said to me, and I sucked in a deep breath. I opened the door to my room and entered. I had to do something. "Madison," I called as I had connected to him through a mind link, and fortunately, he accepted it. "Yes," he asked coldly. "I'm sure you understand why I did that, right? You understand why I said all those lies to you?" I pleaded, and he was quiet for a while before he responded. "No. Nothing can justify what you did, Nora. I don't want to talk to you ever again. The only thing that connects us right now is Julius." "Nothing more," he said, and my heart clenched. Nora's POV. I packed some food in a flask and also got some clothes he could change into. I picked up his brush and some of his things that I knew he would need. I was in haste, I wanted to meet him as soon as I could. I heard a knock on my door, and I turned to face it. "Come in," I said. I already knew who it was. The door opened, and Maxwell came in. "You're going out?" he asked when he saw the way I was dressed, and I nodded. "Yes, I need to see Julius," I replied to him, and he nodded in response. He turned to leave but faced me again. "Wait for me. Let me quickly dress up and go with you." "I will drive you there," he said to me, but I shook my head. "No, take your time. I need to go now because Julius hasn't eaten anything." "You can come and meet me there," I replied to him. He was silent for a while before he nodded, and left my room. I stood up from the bed and packed my hair up before carrying my bag. "Hope you did not forget anything?" Lolita asked me, and I smiled. "Remind me if there is anything like that," I replied and rushed out of the room. I picked up the food that was in the kitchen, and with the help of one of Maxwell's cars, I was able to get to the hospital on time. I met a doctor in front of Julius's ward. "Good morning, madam," the doctor greeted. "Good morning, doctor. How is my son?" I asked curiously, and he smiled. "He is a strong boy. He is responding well to treatment," he replied, and I was elated. "Thank you very much, doctor." "Thank you," I said sincerely, as I couldn't wait to see my son. I was happy that he was doing well, and the fact that he would soon be perfectly fine again made me excited. "I will go and see him now," I said to the doctor, who nodded and walked away while I moved closer to Julius's ward and opened the door. I had just entered when I saw Madison in the room too. He was sitting on a seat beside Julius, feeding him, and Julius was eating with a big smile on his face. I felt a bit awkward, and I stood by the door for a while, but none of them bothered to look at me, although I knew they were aware that I was there. I sighed and walked toward the table where I dropped the things in my hand. "Julius, my darling. Mum is here," I said cheerfully, trying to make my son look at me, but it was like I was speaking to space because no one replied to me. I forced out an awkward smile and walked toward them. "How are you feeling now?" I asked Julius, but he still did not reply to me, and I sat beside Madison, staring at them as Madison fed him while he ate excitedly. Minutes later, Julius wiped his mouth and looked at Madison with sparkling eyes. The food was so delicious. "Thanks a lot," he said, and Madison chuckled. He placed his hand on his head and started stroking his hair. Dad will cook for you every day if you want. Just say it and it will be done, Madison said to him, and I saw Julius's eyes light up. He moved forward and looked at Madison in the eyes. Really? You will cook for me every day? He asked, and Madison nodded. Of course. You just say it, Madison replied, and Julius smiled happily. I had never seen my son so happy before. His happiness was genuine, and for the first time since he started speaking, he was acting more like his age. He was no longer the mature kid that acted like an adult around me but a young boy who was under the protection of his father. I felt guilty again and wanted to apologize, but I knew they wouldn't want to hear that at the moment, so I kept quiet. So, tell me, are you an alpha? Julius asked, and Madison pouted. No, I'm an hybrid, Lord of the Hybrids. But I have a big town which is just like a pack, Madison replied, and Julius's eyes lit up again. Is it very big? He asked, and Madison responded. He made a very big hand demonstration and chuckled. This big? So big, and there are lots of fun things to do there, he said to Julius, who raised his hand to the air and did some dance moves with joy in his eyes. Tell me. Tell me more about your kingdom. Tell me about the things there, he asked, and Madison sat right. There are towns where you would see a lot of fun games and a lot of families playing around. There are aquariums where you would see different types of fish. There are 2 game companies where you can always visit to play games because I have full authority over them. Madison started mentioning the fun things in his pack, and Julius was very excited. He kept clapping and asking for more. He wanted to know more about his father. Is that all? He asked when Madison was no longer talking. No, there is a recreational event now and then too. I decided to tell him the thing that I thought would excite him the most, but he did not even bat an eye to my side. I'm happy to know you have such a big kingdom. I would like to visit someday, or maybe immediately after I leave this hospital. He asked with a raised brow. Yes, I will take you there, I replied, but they both ignored me again. I will come to pick you up from here, and we will go together, Madison replied to him, and he smiled. He hugged Madison and smiled again. I felt left out. No matter how many times I said something, they never glanced at me or responded to me. It was like I wasn't there at all, and it saddened me. I stood up from my seat and walked out of the room. I couldn't stay there any longer. I rested my back on the door and closed my eyes. I didn't want to cry. I wanted to stay strong and stop my tears, but they still rolled down. I told myself I wouldn't cry, but my tears wouldn't stop falling, and before I knew it, my tears became uncontrollable, and I had to cover my mouth to muffle the sound of my sobs. I slumped and continued crying. I missed the time when my son was happy with me. When I was his best friend and when I was the only person he opened up to. I never knew a day like this would come, and I never knew it could be this painful. I opened my eyes to check around to see if anyone was around, but my eyes widened when I saw Alpha Leo standing not very far away from me. I stood up and stared at him. Nora! He called with a worried-filled voice and took a few steps forward, but I ran toward him and hugged him without warning. Why? Why do I have to face all these? I did all I did because I was angry. I hated Madison for pushing me away that way. I hated him for not accepting me when I pleaded so much with him. I hated him for not trusting me and thinking I did not love him enough, when I loved him so much that it hurt. I was just angry. I was angry at him because he could not see my heart, he did not understand how I felt, and I was scared. I stopped as I was almost choking on my tears. Alpha Leo stroked my hair. It's okay. Everything will be fine, Nora. Madison will come back, Julius will come back too, and you will be happy again. He said to me, but that only made my tears roll further. I was scared. I took my baby away because I was scared of what would happen if we decided to continue staying with Madison. I was scared of him hurting my son again out of anger. I wanted to protect my son. What have I done so wrong that they have to treat me this way? I asked and broke the hug. I pointed to the ward Julius was in. You know, I was in there with them and they were talking too excitedly, but whenever I interfered, they would react as if I was an annoying fly that had no importance. They had no reason to speak to me, I was meaningless to them. I was a nobody to them, and they had no time for me. I had to stand apart from them. I was like an outcast. I complained and Alpha Leo pulled me in for a hug again while I cried my eyes out. Minutes later, I was still in Alpha Leo's arms, but I could feel Madison's presence behind me. I broke the hug and looked at him, but he was glaring at us with hate and anger in his eyes. You two look so good together. You fit so well. He said and rolled his eyes. He seemed to be angry with the fact that he saw us together, but why? I was about to explain the situation when he took a step forward and shook his head. He looked at both Alpha Leo and me with so much irritation in his eyes as he opened his mouth. I won't forgive you, Nora. I won't forgive you for keeping my son away from me all these years. He vowed to me and my heart sank. I moved closer to him and shook my head. I only did all that because I was angry at you. I felt annoyed by, he interrupted me. Stop. Nothing can justify what you did, Nora. Well, as you said, we should divorce and go through with the separation. My lawyer will send you a divorce agreement. He said and walked away, leaving me dumbfounded with my mouth wide open. Lord Madison's POV. I said all those words to her, but the only emotion I saw in her eyes was shock. She wasn't sad at all, and she did not bother to apologize or ask me to change my mind. She just stood there staring at me, and I felt like a fool for thinking she still loved me at all. I turned around to leave when I heard Darren's angry voice. What do you think you are doing, Madison? Are you going to make the same mistake again? He asked me, and I sighed. I'm not. I'm not making a mistake this time around. Nora doesn't love me anymore, and this is what I should have done years back, I said to him as I continued walking toward the ward. What if you regret this? Darren asked, but I smirked. Regret? I don't think so, I replied, and he was silent for a while. You might not want this, Madison. You might only be feeling this way right now because you are angry at the moment. Why don't you calm down first and decide that? Darren asked me, but I rolled my eyes. I was certain about my decision, and if someone asked me what I wanted to do after I calmed down, I would still let them know that I wanted Nora out of my life because I was tired of forcing my love on her when she couldn't get over Leo. I won't. This is a decision I can never regret, I replied to Darren. I was about to enter the ward when my phone started ringing, and I dipped my hand into my pocket to bring out my phone. Laura. I called out loud and answered the call. Hey, Laura. I called immediately after placing the phone on my ear. Lord Madison, good morning. How are you doing? She asked me, and I smiled. I'm fine. What's up? I asked, and she was silent for a while, but I could hear sounds underneath, which meant she was walking. Where are you? I haven't seen you for a while. Are you in California? She asked me, and I sighed. It had truly been a while since we last met. I'm in San Francisco right now, but not at home, I replied. Where are you? She questioned. I'm in the hospital, I replied, and I heard a gasping sound. Are you sick? What happened? She asked, with panic in her voice, which amused me. I'm fine. I'm here with someone, but I won't be leaving soon. Let's talk later, okay? I said to her and was about to end the call when she shouted wait. I returned the phone to my ear and raised a brow. What's it? I asked. Should I come over to the hospital? She asked, but I knew she wouldn't like no for an answer. I didn't want to bother her, but I didn't want to turn her down either. Okay. You can come, I said to her and sighed. Address, please. I will be there soon, she said, and I nodded before ending the call. I sent a message containing the hospital's address to her, returned my phone to my pocket, and entered the ward. Julius looked at me and smiled. Dad, what caused the issue between you and Mom? What happened? Why did you separate? He asked me, and I sighed. It's complicated, Julius. I will tell you everything after you've been discharged from here, I replied to him, and he nodded. I walked over to his side and sat down. Again, do you have a wife? I mean, maybe you have a wife, and that's why you left my mom, he asked, and I felt like laughing. He was so smart that I felt proud of him. The only wife I have at the moment is your mom, but a lot of things are going on now, and it's complicated. I will tell you everything later. Just focus on recovering now, I said to him, and he nodded. He sat up in his bed and started playing with some toys I got for him when the door opened and Nora came in. She walked over to us with her head a little lowered, and without saying a word to me, she walked over to the other side of Julius's bed. I'm sorry, Julius. I know I've done wrong things, and I've hurt you, but I'm sorry. Don't you think it's time to forgive Mommy? You know Mom loves you so much, right? She asked, but Julius just rolled his eyes and turned to face me. Nora continued pleading, but he paid no heed to her, and she was about to talk again when my phone rang, and I answered it. Okay, I said and ended the call before sending a text message. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Laura came in. I went over to meet her, and we hugged lightly. How have you been? She asked me, and I smiled. I'm perfectly fine. You were around here? I asked, and she nodded. I was doing something near here, she said and looked at Julius, then turned to face me. Is that your son? She asked, and I nodded with a smile. But you didn't tell me you had a son, she mumbled, and I sighed. It's a long story, but it's not the right time to talk about that, I replied, and she nodded with a smile. She walked over to Julius's side and took his hand. Such a cute boy. He looks so much like you, she said, and I chuckled. Of course. He is my son, I replied. Julius turned to look at me. Dad, is this your girlfriend? He suddenly asked, and Laura looked at me, but she soon covered her mouth and laughed. I smiled at Julius and nodded my head. Yes, she is my girlfriend, I replied, staring at Nora, whose face was filled with different emotions. Nora's POV. My eyes widened. I was shocked when I heard what Madison said concerning the lady, but I knew it could be anything but the truth. It was just a joke. I kept the thought that it was nothing but a joke in my mind as I turned to look at the lady, waiting for her to laugh it off and say it was a joke. But, she said nothing and just kept smiling. I turned to look at Madison too, but he was dead serious. Julius wasn't laughing either. No one was laughing. Everyone believed it was the truth. The lady moved closer to Julius and kissed his cheeks. "What's your name?" she asked Julius, but I expected him to ignore her like he had been doing to me. But, Julius smiled at her. "My name is Julius," he replied politely. "What's your name too?" Julius questioned, and my heart sank. The question I expected him to ask was whether it was true that she had a special relationship with Madison, but she instead asked a question as if he was coming to terms with his father's woman. The lady laughed. "My name is Laura. Nice meeting you." "Well, you can call me Miss Laura," she introduced, and Julius nodded. "So, how is your health? Do you feel better now?" she asked. Julius turned to look at Madison and returned his gaze to the lady that called herself Laura, but I hated to call that name. "I'm fine now. All thanks to my dad's healing and all. I'm perfectly fine now," he replied, earning himself a low chuckle from Madison. "Well, it's because you are strong," Madison replied, and Laura nodded. "Yes, you are strong, just like your dad." "Your dad is very strong too," she replied, and Julius agreed. "Yes, my dad is the strongest in the whole world. I want to be as strong as him," he joked, and they all laughed. "Daddy will make you strong, okay?" Madison replied. "Really? You will?" "I will be strong." The enthusiasm in Julius's voice was amazing, and I couldn't help but sigh while Madison laughed and nodded his head. "Sure. I will do that," he said, and Julius danced. "Promise?" he asked, and Madison answered, "Promise." I watched them laugh and chat without me. Laura, Madison, and Julius were like happy families while I was like an outcast among them as none of them paid me any attention. Laura did not even bother to ask who I was, and she just dedicated all her attention to Julius as if she was his mother. I felt bad and angry, and I wished I could put her in her place, but that would only be wrong. I sucked in a deep breath as my eyes fell on Laura. Tall, slim with long lashes and long black hair that fell on her bare shoulders as she was wearing a long revealing gown. She was pretty, and she made me look at myself with an inferiority complex too. I looked away from her, and my eyes met Madison. He looked at me and looked away without saying a word. They continued talking to each other without paying any attention to me, and that was when I realized I was losing my space in their lives. I could no longer take it, my heart was heavy, and I felt like screaming. I stood up from my seat and walked toward the door, hoping one of them would call me back, but no one did. Realizing that they really had no time for me, I opened the door and left the room. I saw Alpha Leo staring at me, and I stared back. "Nora!" he called, but I looked away and turned to leave. He walked toward me and called again, "Nora," but I didn't reply and continued walking. I walked out of the hospital and continued walking with no destination in mind. I was tired, I was frustrated, I had no goal anymore. I just wanted to continue walking. I felt Alpha Leo's presence at my back, and he continued calling me, but I didn't reply, I had no strength to do that. "Where are you going, Nora? Nora!" he yelled, but I still did not reply to him and continued walking. He ran after me and grabbed my wrist, turning me to face him. Tears rolled down my eyes. I had tried my best to hold the tears back, but seeing him that way made my tears roll, and I couldn't hold them back anymore. "What's wrong, Nora? What happened?" he asked me. What happened? Why was I so sad? What made my heart ache so much? Honestly, I had no idea. I felt lost yet broken, and all I wanted to do was cry, cry, and cry. I just came out for some fresh air, I replied, but my tears continued to roll. Fresh air? He asked, and I nodded. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and nodded again. Fresh air, I replied, and he sighed. There is a park around here where we can sit and relax. Would you like to go there? He asked me, and I was quiet for a while. I would prefer to be alone, but then, it would be better to be with someone. Okay, I replied, and he led the way while I followed closely. We got to the park, and he led me to a place where we were able to sit quietly. None of us said a word to each other as we were both in deep thought. I had a lot on my mind, and he seemed to be not so different either. I honestly don't understand why you are feeling so bad when you clearly said you no longer love Madison. Seriously, I don't understand both of you. I don't understand how you think, and it's annoying the way you treat each other. You are mates, and you are supposed to love, care, and stay with each other, but that isn't the case for you two. Madison is at fault, so are you. I hate the way you treat each other, and I'm getting tired of you too, Lolita lamented, and I knew she was angry. She had been complaining a lot about how Madison and I act toward each other, and she was already frustrated. Is it true that Madison has a girlfriend? Do you think he was telling the truth when he called that lady his girlfriend? Do you know if he is telling the truth or not? I asked Lolita with curiosity in my tone. For some reason, all I cared about was whether he had a girlfriend or not because I couldn't understand it. It kept making my heart ache, and I was confused. Could he be dating someone for real? Could Laura be his girlfriend for real? Why do you want me to know that? Do I reside in him, or am I a seer who sees the future? I don't know, and it's not like I want to interfere, even if I know, Lolita replied angrily, and my heart sank. I needed to know if he was telling the truth or not. I needed to find out. How can I find out? Is there a way to find out without asking him? I want to know, please, I said to Lolita, but she refused to reply to me, and I sucked in a deep breath. Why were you crying? What happened? I heard Alpha Leo's voice beside me, and I turned to him. I stared at him for a while as I started contemplating whether to talk to him or not, but I later came to a decision. Do you know if Madison has a girlfriend? I mean, is he dating anyone now? I asked him. If there was anyone who should know, then it should be him. I knew it wasn't appropriate to ask him, but I was desperate to know. He looked at me with shock in his eyes. Maybe he wanted me to clarify myself, but I wasn't ready to do that, as all I needed from him was a reply. Why do you think so? He asked, and I sighed. Guess I needed to explain after all. A lady came to the hospital then, and Madison introduced her as his girlfriend, I explained, and his eyes widened. Is it Laura? He asked, and I nodded my head. Yes, Laura. Do you know her? I asked him, and he nodded. Yes, Laura is Madison's childhood friend, but I don't know if they are dating or not, he explained. But I don't think they've had sex yet. Or have you ever felt Madison having relation with another lady? He asked me, and that was when it dawned on me. I never did, I replied, and he smiled. Don't worry then. Whatever they have is not serious. There is nothing to worry about, he comforted me, and I breathed in relief. He placed his hand across my shoulder and pulled me closer to himself. He made me rest my head on his shoulder and started caressing my hair. It's okay now, he said, and I smiled. I was very comfortable in his arms. It felt like home, and I was glad. If only what happened then hadn't happened, I would be with you by now, and we would have made a great couple. I wouldn't be living this way, and I would be happy, I said to him. I had thought about this several times before, and I felt bad any time it came to my mind. His hand that was caressing my head stopped, and he sighed. Sometimes, it's better to be friends than be mates, he muttered, and I agreed. Alpha Leo's POV. Despite saying what I said to her, I still felt a little bad. My mind went back to years ago when I still had a chance with her, and I wished I had made a different choice then. I wished I had made her mine then, and the thought that we would be happy together by now made me angry at myself, and I regretted my decision even more. I wished I could turn back the hands of time and make a better decision, but then, thinking more about it, maybe it was better to stay as friends instead of becoming lovers. I have something to tell you, I said to her, and she smiled. What's it? She asked. I've found my second chance mate, I announced, and she raised her head. She looked at me with wide eyes and gasped. What? Really? When? She asked, and I smiled. Here in San Francisco, I said, and she gasped again. Who? She asked once more. It's someone you know. Ava, that girl with teleporting ability, I explained, and she covered her mouth. She stared at me for a while before beaming a smile and clapping her hands. This is great. She's a very good choice. I'm so happy for you, she congratulated me. Yeah. I said to her, and she smiled. So, how's it going? Is everything going well with her? She asked, and I turned to look at her face, realizing she was genuinely happy for me made me smile too. I turned to look in the distance and shook my head. It's a bit complicated with Ava. Nothing is really working well, I replied to her, and she frowned. What do you mean? Isn't she your type? I remember you like slim girls with curvy shapes, and that's exactly how Ava is. What else is there? She asked, and I turned to look at her with wide eyes before I chuckled. No, that's not it, I said and chuckled again. Then, what is it? She asked me, and I took in a silent breath. A lot happened, I said to her, and she sat up. She moved closer to me and raised her brows. Tell me what happened. I want to hear it all, she said, and I frowned. Why? Why should I tell you? I questioned, and she made a knowing face. It's not like you have anyone else to tell apart from me. Come on. Tell me, she joked, and I laughed. Okay. Okay, you're right. The thing is, my father was the one who killed her mother, I explained to her, and I saw her eyes widen. She was shocked but confused at the same time. What do you mean? How did you know that? Who told you? The way she asked, it was more like she thought someone had lied to me about my father, and I wished it was that way too, but my mother had already confirmed it. Ava actually came into my life to kill me because she wanted to avenge her mother's death. My father raped and killed her mother in the dungeon. I explained everything that happened to her and even how my mother reacted when I asked her about it. She even tried to kill me many times, but she stopped, I added, and she sighed. She seemed to understand me very well. So, all that happened, she asked, and I nodded. What are you going to do now? Are you just going to leave her like that? She questioned, and I sighed. I don't know yet, but I will try to think of something when I return to California, I said to her, and she nodded. I hope it works. But don't hesitate to tell me if you need my help. I can help you persuade her, give her some advice, and also tell her how much you can care for her. I can give her some nice reviews about you that will make her fall head over heels for you, she said, and I laughed. Well. Too bad, I don't need your help. I can do it myself, I replied proudly, and she rolled her eyes, earning a chuckle from me. I stood up and turned to face her. Would you like some ice cream? I want to go get some, I asked, and she nodded. Yes, I'd like to get one for Julius too, she replied, and I left to get it. I returned with 3 ice creams and gave her one. I placed one on the seat beside me and took one for myself. We sat quietly and licked our ice cream before deciding to take Julius's ice cream to him upon arrival. We found Madison and Laura chatting and laughing, as if they hadn't noticed Nora's sad mood earlier when she left, and it annoyed me a little. I walked into the room and cleared my throat, causing Madison and Laura to go quiet. Julius turned to look at me. I walked over to him and gave him the ice cream. We got this for you, I said to him, and he said, thank you, before excitedly taking it and starting to lick. He looked at Nora and then turned to face me. Are you dating my mother? He asked me, and I chuckled. No, my dear. Your mother and I are friends, I replied to him, and he nodded before continuing to enjoy his ice cream. Nora walked over and sat beside his bed. How do you feel now? She asked, but Julius only looked at her and then looked away, as if he wasn't the one Nora was talking to. She looked at me and smiled awkwardly. She seemed embarrassed and sad, which pained me as well. But, there was nothing I could do for her, it was something she had to work out for herself. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do anything for her. She sat there watching without saying a word for a while as Julius continued to enjoy the ice cream without a care in the world. She eventually stood up and walked toward the door. Where are you going? I asked, and she turned to face me. I just want to go sit outside. Will you join me? She asked with a bitter smile, and I nodded. Okay, let's do that, I said to her and waved at Julius before walking toward her. We both left the room and closed the door. We walked a little away from the ward and sat on a bench, where we both started thinking about different things. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew I shouldn't, she needed time to grow stronger by herself as well. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Laura came out. She bowed to me and then walked over to Nora. I'm Laura, she said, looking at Nora, who raised her head to look at her and nodded. Yes, I know who you are. You introduced yourself hours ago, she replied in a plain voice. I could sense anger or hatred in her tone. Laura smiled. I'm sorry for not coming to your wedding, she apologized, but Nora only shrugged without saying a word. But, I heard you are divorcing, she added, and my eyes widened. I had thought she came to act like a responsible person, but hearing what she said, I immediately realized that she only came there to act like a jerk. Nora seemed surprised, and she looked at her with shock in her eyes. How did you know that? She asked, looking disappointed yet angry at the same time, while all Laura did was laugh as if she was mocking her. Why wouldn't I know that? Madison told me, of course. Remember, I'm his girlfriend now, and we don't keep anything from each other, she replied, and my eyes twitched. My blood boiled as I watched Nora clench her fist. She was angry too. Lord Madison's POV. I walked out of the ward after helping Julius dispose of the ice cream container, but I stopped when I saw Nora and Laura discussing. I tried to listen to what they were saying, but they stopped the moment they saw me, and it irked me a little. I walked a bit closer to them and smiled at Laura. Shall we leave now? She smiled back at me and nodded. I was about to turn when my eyes met with Nora's and I saw anger in her eyes. She was trying her best to hide it, but it was still obvious in her eye, but I only looked away without saying a word. Laura got to my side and we walked out of the hospital together. "Thank you," I said the moment we came out of the hospital, and Laura looked at me with a big smile on her face. "What for?" she asked knowingly, and I smiled. "For playing along with me in there. I thought you would tell them the truth because I didn't tell you anything beforehand," I said to her, and she laughed. "So, are you going to go through with the divorce?" she asked me, and I sighed. I nodded my head. "Yes, we will have to do that," I replied. We were both quiet for a while before she talked again. "Did you stop loving her?" she asked, and I smiled bitterly. "If only that is possible. If only I can stop loving her, I would do that, but it's not easy. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't do it," I said to her and sucked in a deep breath. I would love to stop loving Nora, I would love to forget about her and move on with my life, but that seemed impossible to do. Laura stopped and turned to face me while I stopped too. She moved closer to me and placed her finger on my cheeks. She trailed down my cheeks with her finger down to my beards and started running her finger through my beards seductively. "What if I help you forget about her?" she asked, and I frowned. My expression changed and I was about to reply to her when I felt Nora's presence, so I took a step back and sighed. Nora walked up to us and stopped only when she was close to us. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked. I was about to reply to her when Laura waved her fingers in front of my eyes to regain my attention and smiled sweetly. "I will be leaving now. Let's talk later," she said, and pulled in to plant a kiss on my lips before walking away. I was shocked. No, being shocked was an understatement. I didn't expect her to do that, and my eyes widened. I watched her leave with my mouth hung open and only closed it back when I realized Nora was watching us. I felt irritated by the kiss and I hated the fact that she did it without my consent, but I had to keep quiet as I didn't want Nora to notice anything. I watched Laura enter her car and left the hospital before I returned my gaze to Nora, and our eyes met. We stared into each other's eyes for a while without saying a word until I cleared my throat and looked away. "What do you want to say? Be fast with it because I need to go and meet my son soon," I said to her, and she looked away too. She seemed to feel awkward, but I didn't care. She was quiet for a while before she turned to face me and cleared her throat. "What are your plans?" she asked me, and I frowned. I gave her a questioning brow. "What are you talking about?" "My plans about what?" I asked her, and she crossed her arms. "Your plans about Julius. Are you going to take him away from me?" she asked, and that was when I realized what she meant. I sneered and rolled my eyes. "Why would I do that when you are his mother? I can't take him away from you," I replied to her, and I saw her face washed with relief. She seemed tensed before, but her complexion turned a bit better the moment she heard what I said. She stared at me for a while, looked away, and returned her gaze to me again. She seemed to have something to say, but maybe she did not want to say it, or she did not know where to start. Whatever it was, I had no business with her, and I pocketed my hands. "I'm leaving. Are you going to talk or you are done talking?" I asked her, but she only kept staring at me as if she was begging herself inwardly whether to talk or not. I walked past her and stopped only behind her. "Come find me whenever you are ready to talk. I'm going to meet my son now," I said to her, and left without waiting for her to speak. I entered the hospital and met Leo going out, and I frowned. I walked toward him and moved my head to the side. "You, tell me, what are you doing here? You've been coming here since yesterday as if you have nothing else to do. Tell me what relationship you have here, because the child in there is mine and not yours. Don't you have anything to do? And if that's the case, why don't you leave for California, maybe there will be cases to solve in your pack. I asked him with anger in my voice. For some reason, I still felt annoyed and irritated whenever I saw him with Nora and the way they acted like two close people. I just could not wrap my head around why the two of them became so close when they claimed not to love each other anymore, even though I could feel their feelings in their eyes. He sighed and looked around before he returned his gaze to me. I'm here for Nora. I have a lot to do, but I have to be here for her because I don't like the way you treat her. You treat her so badly that I can't help but want to be there for her as her friend. He said to me, and I frowned. I moved closer to him and looked straight into his eyes. What are you doing? It's been 4 years, and you're still not over her? Why so persistent? Nora is mine, and she's staying with me, I said. He laughed and stepped closer. Really? Does she belong to you? Is that what you mean? He asked, and my eyes twitched. He was asking a silly question, but I nodded. She is my wife and bears my mark. I spoke possessively. Are you challenging me? He asked, and I frowned. On what? I retorted. On Nora, of course. I don't want you to provoke me because if you do, it won't take much for me to win her back. I won't break a sweat before she becomes mine again. Just a tap of my fingers and she will be mine, so don't provoke me, please, he threatened. Nora's POV: I entered the hospital after Madison walked past me, and I was surprised to see him and Alpha Leo staring at each other. With the looks in their eyes, it was obvious they were quarreling about something, and I wondered what it was. Curious to know, I walked over to them and stood beside Alpha Leo. What's happening? What are you doing? I asked Alpha Leo, who turned to face me. He was about to reply when Madison hissed, Really? Is he the only one you see here? Why is he the one you are asking questions to? He snapped at me, and I was shocked. Why was he so angry? I looked at him and wondered what was happening, but I soon looked away from him and faced Alpha Leo again. Please, tell me, I said to him, and he sighed. It's nothing. I should leave now, he said, and I frowned. Why did he suddenly want to leave without telling me what happened? Without being told, I knew something was wrong, and I was confused. What? I wanted to question him, but I stopped and shook my head. Okay then. Thanks for coming, I said to him, and he nodded. All right, he said and left. He was different, and he was angry. I watched him leave before I turned to face Madison, only to realize he was glaring daggers at me. Tell me, what's between you and Leo? I can't think of anything that can be happening between you two, and I'm confused. Will you mind telling me? He was asking a question, but his tone was so rude that I felt irritated. I moved toward him and frowned. I beg your pardon. What do you mean? What's your business with that? I asked him, and he groaned. The last time I checked, you and Leo are no longer mates. So, what's he doing here? Why does he keep lingering around you like flies? He asked, and my stomach churned. I didn't mind him hating me and insulting me like I was nobody, but I hated the fact that he was talking about Alpha Leo with so much disrespect when all he ever did was care about me. If not for Alpha Leo in my life, I couldn't even imagine what would have happened to me by now. When he and my son turned their backs on me, it was Alpha Leo who stood by me and kept me safe all the time. Why do you care? Alpha Leo is not like you, he cares about me. Is there a crime in that? When you left me, when you broke my heart, when you treated me like I was trash, he was the only one who stood by me and held me tight. We've stayed apart for so long after we rejected each other, but he continues to care about me and treat me like I'm a jewel, when the person I chose gave me nothing but pain. Why do you hate that so much? I yelled at him. Despite breaking his heart, he continued to love and care for me. He continues to stay by my side, but you, what have you ever done for me aside from making me cry all day? What have you ever done for me aside from causing me so much pain? I added and walked away from him. My eyes were already moist with tears, but I didn't want to cry in front of him. I had cried so much today that I didn't want to continue crying. I wanted to stay strong. I walked toward my son's ward and entered. I saw him playing with Madison's iPad, a big smile on his face. He seemed to be watching a funny video or playing a fun game, whatever it was, he was enjoying it. I walked over to his side and sat beside him. My baby, what are you doing? I asked him, but he only raised his head to look at me and continued playing with the iPad as if I didn't talk to him. Won't you talk to me? Are you going to continue this way? Why won't you talk to me, my darling? I asked him with a concerned face. He frowned. I don't want to talk to you, he said without looking at me, and I sighed. For how long? I asked. For as long as possible, he replied, and I sucked in a deep breath. Okay. Whenever you are ready to talk to me, let me know. I'm always here for you, baby, I said to him, and he raised his eyes to look at me. I thought he was going to speak to me, but he cleared his throat. I will be staying with my dad when I leave here. I won't be returning to London with you, he said and looked away immediately. I was shocked. I stared at him for a while, and I couldn't close my mouth. Why would he do this to me? Why? Did Madison tell you to do that? I asked him, shock evident in my voice. Madison had promised he would let him go with me, so why this? No, Dad didn't tell me anything, but I want to stay with him. I've lived without him for a good 4 years, and I don't want to miss another moment with him. I want to stay with him, he replied to me, and my heart sank. But you know this is a big decision, right? You should have asked me first before deciding this, I said to him, frustration obvious in my voice. He looked at me again and frowned. What do you mean, Mum? It's not like I'm going to live with a stranger. Lord Madison is my father, and he can't hurt me. He loves me so much, and I know he will take good care of me, he replied, and I frowned. A 4-year-old kid talking this way? Who did I give birth to? Then, what about me? Don't you care about me at all? Don't you want to stay with me too? I asked, jealousy washing over me. He frowned. I want to live with you, but I don't know if you want the same because if you do, you can come with me to my dad's house. My dad is such a nice person, and he won't say no to you, he said to me as if he was convincing me to go with him, but I shook my head and sucked in a deep breath. I can't go with you. I can't live in that mansion anymore, I said to him, and he frowned. Why can't you go there? Do people there bite? He asked me. They don't, but it's complicated, I replied to him. Why so? He questioned. You won't understand, Julius. You won't. I knew he wanted to know what happened between his father and me, but I wasn't ready to tell him yet. He was still young, too young to understand what happened between us. He shook his head. How is it complicated? Can't you tell me? I want to know everything, he persisted, and I groaned. It's a bit complicated, dear. You are supposed to understand, I said to him pleadingly, but he only returned his gaze to whatever he was doing on the iPad. What's there to understand? I don't get it, and I don't want to understand. If you want to live with me, you should come with me to my dad's house, he said and dropped the phone. He sat back in his bed and covered himself up. It was obvious he wasn't in the mood to reply to me anymore. I stared at him for a while and stood up. I needed to leave to clear my mind. I felt like everything was working against me, and it was frustrating. I left the ward and met Madison in front of the door, making a call. I moved closer to him and stood beside him, waiting for him to finish the call so I could speak to him. Minutes later, he ended the call and turned to face me. "What is it?" he asked, and I turned to face him. "Did you know that Julius wants to live with you?" I asked him, and he smiled. "Yes. But don't think that it was me who convinced him to come stay with me. It was his idea, but I'm happy about it," he replied, and I grunted. "Happy? What should happen to me then? Then, what do I do? What should I do with myself?" I asked with reddened eyes, and he shrugged. "What should you do? You can always come to visit him and see how he is doing. No one's stopping you from doing that," he replied, and I shook my head, tears threatening to fall from my eyes. But I held them back and looked back at him. "I don't want to. I don't want to stay away from my son. Doing that would make me a guest to my son, which I don't want. I want to be with my son every step of his life. I want to be a part of his life," I said to him, and he shrugged again. "That's up to you. You can always make the decisions," he said to me and walked past me. He was about to enter the ward when I called his name. "Madison," he stopped and turned to face me. "What is it?" he asked, and I swallowed. "Can I stay with you? For the meantime that my son will be with you, can I stay in the mansion with you?" I questioned, and he shrugged. "It's your choice," he replied and walked away. Nora's POV: I was in my room, packing my clothes after I finished packing Julius's clothes, when I heard a knock on the door. "Come in," I said, as I already knew who it was. Maxwell entered and walked toward me. "You're still packing?" he asked, and I nodded. He sat on my bed right in front of me and looked at me keenly. "Are you sure about this? Do you think this is right?" he asked me, and I paused. I dropped the gown I was folding and sat beside him. "I hate to do this too, but I don't want to stay away from my son. Letting my son live in that house without me will make him drift away from me. I don't want that," I replied to him, and he sucked in a deep breath. "I hope all will be well. I want you to know that I will always be here for you. Whenever you need my help, whatever it is, I will make sure to do it for you. Remember that I'm always here for you, okay?" he said to me, and my heart melted. I smiled and nodded my head before standing up. I quickly packed my things and turned to face him. "I'm done packing. Will you help me take them down to his place?" I asked, and he nodded. "Sure. I will do that," he said and carried one of my bags. "I will carry this for you and send 2 maids to carry the rest. Wait here for them," he said as he left my room. I waited a little, and the door opened again, revealing 2 maids who walked to my side and bowed. "We are asked to help you with your things," they said politely, and I nodded my head. They carried the bags and led the way, while I followed closely, and we all went to meet Maxwell, who was patiently waiting for us downstairs. With the help of the 2 maids, we were able to get the bags into the car, and I entered too. "Everything is set?" Maxwell asked, and I nodded before he started the engine, and we left for Madison's mansion. The drive there was silent, but I sensed thousands of words in Maxwell's silence. Even though he wasn't saying anything, he was expressing a lot through his expression, and I knew he was worried. He was worried about me, and it made my heart race, too. We arrived at the mansion, and he dropped me off. "Bye, Maxwell," I said to him, and he waved back before driving away. Some maids walked over to me and collected my things while I walked into the mansion with them. The first person I saw was Madison's mother, who walked over to me and hugged me. "Welcome back home, Nora. It's so good to have you back," she said, and I smiled. We broke the hug, and I gave her a slight bow. "It's nice seeing you too, ma'am. How have you been?" I asked, and she chuckled. "This old body of mine has been causing quite a ruckus, but it's been well," she joked, and I laughed. "Ma'am, where is Julius? Is he here already?" I asked. I already knew Madison would have informed his mother about my son and me. She looked toward the stairs and smiled. "He just came in with his dad. He should be in his room," she told me, and I smiled. "All right, thanks, ma'am," I said and walked past her. I was about to start climbing the stairs when I saw Madison coming down the stairs, so I moved back to stand with his mother. He looked at me but looked away without saying a word or even smiling at me. "Should I take you to the guest room?" his mother asked, and I smiled. "I'd appreciate it," I said. "No, she will be staying in the room with me," Madison suddenly interjected, and my brow furrowed. I turned to look at him and asked, "What do you mean? What are you saying? What are you up to?" But all he did was turn and return upstairs. I followed him and went upstairs. "What are you doing, Madison? Why should we use the same room?" I asked him, and he turned to face me. "I'm not doing this for any reason. I'm only trying to be considerate to my son. I don't want to create a bad impression on him by staying apart from his mom." "He wouldn't be happy with that," he replied, and I twitched my eyes. "What do you mean? Julius already knows we are not together. What are you saying?" I asked him. "Well, you can treat Julius however way you want, but I will raise him the way I want to, and I won't let him have the impression of a broken home when he is still so young," he replied, and I frowned. I had a lot to say, but I refused to speak and walked toward the bags that were already placed at the center of the room and started unpacking. Madison walked toward me and stood beside me. "About the divorce paper, I will send it to you for signing the moment I get it." "I want you to sign it then," he said, and my heart sank, but I nodded without saying anything and walked past him toward the closet. I opened it while dragging my bags along with me. I entered the closet and started arranging my clothes, but then I saw my old clothes, the ones I wore 4 years ago, still neatly arranged in the closet. I was surprised. It was like I had been wearing them. The clothes were neat, which amazed me. I looked at other things like shoes, bags, and the rest of the things I didn't take with me 4 years ago, only to see that they were all neat. No dust, nothing. They were neat and looked new. I stood there, staring at the items, and also wondering why Madison did all that when he hated me so much. That was when Lolita spoke up. "Can't you see that Madison still loves you? Why are you acting like this? Why can't you talk to him like a mature person? I believe everything will be solved if you do this," she advised. But I remained silent for a while before I walked toward my clothes stand and started arranging my things. I arranged everything and returned to the room, where I saw Madison sitting in front of his system, fully focused on his work. I looked around the room, and my eyes caught something on the bedside table. I walked toward it and my eyes widened when I saw it was our wedding picture. I picked it up and stared at it, surprised that I didn't notice it the first time I came there. Unknowingly, a smile bloomed on my face, and my heart melted. I took a deep breath and turned to look at Madison. "Why do you still have this here?" Thinking about it, I had no idea why he would keep my things intact in his house when I left 4 years ago, and we had acted like enemies ever since. He turned to look at me and was quiet for a while before he sighed. "We are still married, Nora. I will remove them all after we divorce," he said to me and returned to his work. I stared at the picture again and sighed. Madison's POV: we were all sitting in the dining room, eating breakfast in silence. Nora was sitting across from me, my mother by her side, and Julius by my side, while everyone concentrated on their food and ate humbly. Until my mother cleared her throat, and we all raised our heads to look at her. She smiled softly and turned to look at Julius, who was staring at her and eating his food at the same time. "Julius," she called, and Julius raised a brow. "Yes, Grandma," he replied, and my mother smiled. "What's your favorite color?" I wondered why she would be asking such a question while we were eating, but I realized Julius was okay with it and he even smiled. He dropped his spoon and crossed his arms. "I like blue," he said after thinking for a while, and my mother looked a bit surprised. "Blue? Why blue?" she asked, and Julius smiled. He picked up his spoon again and started eating. "Because it's the color of my favorite football club." "I like blue," he said, and my mother frowned. "How old are you again?" she asked. She seemed to be surprised by his way of talking, as if he was a mature kid when he was only 4. Julius smiled and munched gently on his food, making my mother wait with amusement in her eyes. "I'm 4. I turned 4 a few days ago," he said, and my mother gasped. "You are just 4, and you can speak this fluently? You are so smart and eloquent at 4. She exclaimed and turned to face Nora, who also looked at her and smiled. "How is this possible? How come he is so smart?" she asked, still showing how shocked she was. Nora chuckled. "He has a very fast growth. He grew faster than his mates, and by the 7th month, he was already walking well. Before he was a year old, he could already speak very well and eloquently. It was surprising, and it makes me wonder how he became this smart," Nora explained, and my mother turned to face Julius again, still looking surprised. "I guess it's because of his gift," Nora added, and my mother turned to face her again. "What gift is that?" she asked curiously, but Nora could only shake her head. "I don't know yet. I've been trying to find that out too, but I don't have an idea yet," she replied and sighed. "I think it should be the gift of speed. I'm not sure about that, though," she added, and my mother nodded, understanding her. I listened to them talk, and I was angry. I felt my blood boiling, and I resented Nora for not letting me be part of my son's childhood. I wanted to see him when he was just a toddler, I wanted to see him when he started walking, when he first started speaking, the day he was born, the day he first attended school, the day he did everything in his life. I wanted to witness everything, but Nora denied me that opportunity, just because she hated me. I clenched my fist and lowered my head a little. I turned to look at Julius and saw him looking back at me. He must have noticed that I wasn't happy with something, and I was angry, but he beamed a smile at me and dropped his spoon. "Tell me, Dad, what's your gift?" he asked, and I sighed. I was angry, but hearing his voice somehow soothed my worries and made me feel pleased again. "Oh, I know, healing, right? That was why you were able to heal me after the surgery then," he said jokingly, and I laughed. So, what's your dad's gift? I mean Grandpa? He asked, looking all curious and ready to learn more about me. I smiled. My father's ability is seeing visions. He had the gift of seeing visions, and he was quite good at it, I said to him, and his eyes lit up. He opened his mouth for a while before he closed it back and clapped. This is wonderful. Grandpa was that great? How I wish I had met him. Such a great gift he had. He exclaimed with a big smile on his face and nodded his head as he turned to face my mother. Grandma, what's your gift? Tell me your gift, too. He said, and my mother smiled. She stopped eating and turned to face me before she returned her gaze to Julius and revealed a heartier smile. My gift? She asked, and Julius nodded. Yes, your gift. Dad told me Grandpa's was seeing visions. So, what's yours? I want to know too. He asked, and my mother laughed. She seemed to be entertained by the way Julius spoke to her and his tone. Well, my ability is mind reading. I can read the minds of others. Not all the time, though, and not everything the person is thinking, but I can read some of it. Whatever it is, I can read it. She explained, and I saw Julius gasp. He covered his mouth as his eyes widened in surprise. He looked at me as if he wanted me to tell him it was a lie, but I did not, and he gasped again. You can read minds? He asked again, and my mother nodded with a bigger smile on her face. Seeing how surprised Julius was about the mind-reading ability pleased her and made her proud. I can read everything about others if I pay full attention. Isn't that amazing? My mom asked, and Julius nodded his head in agreement. He was quiet for a while as he stared at my mother with respect in his eyes. He looked at both Nora and me and smiled. Grandpa had the vision gift, Grandma has the gift of reading minds, my dad has the gift of healing, and my mother has the gift of healing too. But, I don't think I will have the same gift as my parents. Mine might be different. He said and smiled. Nora cleared her throat and nodded. Yes, you can always have another gift, and we will be glad to help you through it. You might not have the same ability as ours, and you might not have the same ability as Grandpa or Grandma. Nora explained to him, but he only picked up his spoon and started eating as if he wasn't the one Nora was talking to. I stared at him for a while before I looked at Nora, who looked sad. She looked pained, and I knew it was because of how Julius treated her. We all ate in silence, with no one saying anything throughout the meal. After the food, Nora stood up and went upstairs. I watched her leave and stood up to follow her because I knew she wasn't okay. I didn't want to follow her, but my mind was with her, and it kept bothering me. I entered the room and was shocked to see her crying, but she wiped her tears the moment I entered the room and turned her back to me. I walked over to her and thought about hugging her to comfort her, but was that right? I thought about it for a while and decided to hug her, but I stopped myself at the last minute, turned around, and left. Nora's POV. I cried a little longer after Madison left the room without saying a word to me, and I wiped my eyes. I entered the bathroom, washed my face, and applied makeup before leaving the room. I thought about what to do, but then it came to my mind that the only thing I could do in the house was speak with my son, and I walked toward his room to do just that. I knocked, but there was no response, and I entered the room. I saw him and Madison playing a video game on the TV, and I smiled as I sat at their side, as the two were sitting at the edge of the bed. Are you the one winning, Julius? I asked, but he only shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Oops. I want to watch you win, my dear. I'm rooting for you. He nodded his head again without even showing me a smile to appreciate my encouragement. I sat there watching them play for a while. They would laugh, glare at each other, smirk, shout, and laugh again while I sat there, watching them with boredom in my eyes. Who is winning now? Is it you, Julius? I asked my son again, but he only looked at his dad and nodded his head. It was like I was a big disturbance to him, and he wanted me to leave. I felt bad. I turned to look at Madison, but he didn't bother to look at me either and just continued playing. After a few minutes of staring at him, he shouted and laughed, still staring at the screen. I frowned and moved closer to Julius. Can we talk? Just for a while. I won't take too much of your time, I said to him, hoping he would agree. Without raising his head, Julius shook his head while still playing his games. I don't want to talk to you, he said, and my eyes widened. At least for a few minutes, I asked, but he ignored me and continued playing his game. I was frustrated, my blood boiled, and I snatched the pad from him. I thought about throwing it away, but I thought against it and paused the game. Can you at least let us talk? Let's talk for a few minutes, I yelled, frustration taking over my patience. I was tired. He looked at me and shook his head firmly. I said I would rather not talk to you. Can you leave me alone, please? He asked, angrily, and I frowned. Just for a few minutes, Julius. Let's talk just for a few minutes, I said to him. You've been like this for days already. Is it not enough? Why don't you give me the chance to speak to you? I asked him, but he only picked the pad and looked at me with angry eyes. I don't want to. I don't want to hear anything you have to say. Can you leave, please? He asked me, and my eyes twitched. My heart sank, and I was angry. Don't talk to me that way, Julius. I'm your mother, I hollered. I didn't teach my son to speak so rudely to me, and it annoyed me to see him speak with no regard for me. I expected him to apologize, but he only shook his head. No, you are not my mother, he said, breaking my heart into a million pieces. If you were my mother, you wouldn't keep the truth away from me for so long. No mother would keep her son away from his father after they knew what the son goes through every day without a father when all his friends had their fathers around. You are not my mother, he said, and I gasped. I looked at Madison, who looked back at me without saying a word, and I staggered backward. I moved back little by little while staring at Julius, who refused to meet my eyes, and I left the room. I walked away, leaving them in the room while I walked around the mansion with tears in my eyes. I was sure some workers would have seen me, but I didn't care. I wanted to compose myself and act mature as I've always done, but it wasn't easy as Julius kept coming to my mind and Madison's cold face wouldn't leave my mind either. I strolled around for a while before I decided to do something else to distract myself, and that was when I decided to make a mind link with someone who would be able to lighten my mood, even if it would be a little. I thought of connecting with Maxwell, but then I decided to connect with Alpha Leo instead. Hi, Alpha Leo. Are you still around, or have you returned to California? I asked him through the mind link. No, I'm still around. Hope all is all right with you, he asked, and I sucked in a deep breath. Can we meet? I asked him, and he was quiet for a while before he replied. Did something happen? Are you okay? He questioned, but I sighed again and wiped the tears that rolled down my face. I'm okay. I just want to see you, I said to him. Okay. I will send the address to your phone. You can come to meet me in my apartment," he said, and I ended the mind link. A few seconds later, I got a message on my phone about his address, and I walked out of the mansion. I boarded a taxi, told the driver the address, and he drove me down to the apartment. I entered the apartment and saw Alpha Leo waiting at the entrance for me. He walked toward me when he saw the look in my eyes and hugged me. "Welcome," he said softly and led me to his room. He made me sit on his bed and went to bring water for me, which I drank before he collected the cup, dropped it, and sat beside me. "What happened?" he asked, and I sucked in a deep breath. I opened my mouth to talk, but all that came out were tears. I was bitter. Seeing the way I was crying bitterly, he pulled me in for a hug again and started stroking my hair while I cried in his arms. It took me a few minutes to control my emotions, and I let out a deep breath. I closed my eyes and opened them back as I tried to release myself from his warm embrace, so he could know I was fine, but he pulled me back. I tried to free myself again, and he let me go this time around, but the next moment, I felt his lips on mine, and my eyes widened in shock. I wanted to push him away, but then I found myself responding to the kiss, and before I knew it, we were kissing passionately. His hand that was on my waist moved up a little, and he was about to touch my breast when we felt a presence in the room, and we both pulled away. I turned my head to see who it was, and my eyes widened when I noticed that it was Ava, Alpha Leo's second chance mate. Alpha Leo stood up and ran toward her. "Ava, I can explain. It's not what you think." "I can explain," he tried clarifying himself, but Ava shook her head with disappointment in her eyes. "I don't want to listen. I came here to discuss with you if we can work toward our bond, but I can see you will never stop loving Nora. Even after finding out that I'm your second chance mate, you continue loving her. I knew you can never change," she said, shaking her head bitterly. Alpha Leo shook his head. "It's not what you think, Ava. It was just an impulse. I didn't think." He stopped and grunted. Ava moved backward, still shaking her head, and looked at me before returning her gaze to Alpha Leo. "Don't come close to me. Don't you ever show up in front of me again," she warned, but Alpha Leo tried to hold her hand and she glared at him. Before Alpha Leo could say anything, she teleported away. Alpha Leo walked over to the wall and started punching it while groaning loudly, and I knew he was angry. I stood up from the bed and walked over to him. "Alpha Leo," I called, hoping I could comfort him, but he grunted and punched the wall again. "Stay away, Nora. Don't say a word. This isn't the right time for you to say anything," he said to me and punched the wall again. I felt bad. I felt rejected and sad. Hearing that word from him broke my heart and made me emotional. I nodded my head, bowed, and left his house. I thought about returning to Madison's mansion, but I thought against it and went to a bar. I sat down alone in a corner and started drinking away. The only thing I could do at the moment was drink like there was no tomorrow, and that was exactly what I wanted to do. Different guys walked up to me to speak with me, but I shunned them all. I once had 2 men, and presently, the 2 men looked down on me and acted as if I was nobody to them. If there was anything I hated the most at the moment, it was men. My son, my mate, Alpha Leo, they were all men, and they all hurt me. I was drinking and drinking when I suddenly heard Madison's voice in my head. "Nora, where are you?" he asked, and I giggled. "I'm having fun." "A lot of fun," I replied while still laughing. "Are you drunk, Nora? Are you drunk? Where are you?" he asked, and I could feel he was worried, which made me shake my head. "Of course not," I'm just having fun here, I replied and grunted before drinking another full cup. Where are you? He asked and I looked around. I'm in a bar where strippers operate. It's fun here, come and join us, I said to him and drank again. What are? He was about to say something else, but I ended the connection. Lord Madison's POV. My mind was unsettled after Nora ended the mind link and I connected again, but she blocked me off. I stood up from the bed and started pacing around, thinking of what to do, until it came to my mind to call her. I quickly ran to the drawer where I dropped my phone and picked it up. I dialed her number, but she did not pick up, and I was frustrated. I groaned and paced around the room aimlessly, not knowing what to do. She was drunk and I knew it. If a man walked toward her, would she be able to protect herself? The thought of men touching her and taking advantage of her drunken state made my blood boil with anger, and I threw my phone onto the bed. I walked toward the door and was about to leave the room when I remembered I had just left my phone. I'm going to look for her. Heck! I can't take this anymore. I need to find her, I said to Darren, who didn't reply as I went to pick up my phone and left the room in haste. I saw Julius chatting with my mother downstairs, and I walked to meet them. Julius, Dad will be back, I said to him and kissed his forehead. Where are you going, Dad? He asked, and I sucked in a deep breath. Telling him that his mother was drunk somewhere would worry him a lot, and that would make him feel disappointed in his mom too. Thinking about what to say, an idea popped up in my head, and I revealed a convincing smile. I need to meet a business partner. He is in town and will be leaving early tomorrow morning. I lied to him, and fortunately, he believed me. Okay, Dad. Be back soon, he said and waved to me. My mother waved to me too, and I rushed out of the house. I hurried to my car and got in. I had no idea where she was, but I could remember she told me it was a bar with strippers. There are a lot of bars with strippers, but there was only one close to the mansion, so I decided to visit there first and I started my car. I drove out of the compound and down to the bar where I thought she could be. Fortunately, I perceived her scent the moment I got there, and I sighed. She is in there. She is inside this bar, Darren informed me, and I nodded. I already sensed her presence there. I walked into the bar and looked around in search of her, but she wasn't in her seat. I was confused, wondering if I had sensed wrong, until I spotted a lady dancing with a man, and I knew right then that the lady was my Nora. I rushed toward her with anger. Looking at her dancing with another man made my blood boil. I was angry and jealous, and the possessive side of me kicked in. I grabbed her waist and pulled her to me. Who are you? The man asked angrily, but I only had to push him once before he regained his senses and ran off. Nora turned to me and laughed. Oh, is this Lord Madison? Hey, you came for me. She cheered and laughed again. She was drunk. She was so drunk that she didn't even realize I was staring at her with anger in my eyes, and she continued laughing. Let's go home, I said to her, but she shook her head. I'm not. I don't want to go home, she replied, and my eyes widened. You don't want to go home? I asked, feeling annoyed, and she shook her head firmly. I won't. Unless you dance with me. Come, let's dance, she said as she walked around me while her hands found their way to my neck. What are you doing? I don't want to dance. Let's just go home, I said to her, trying to persuade her, but she was persistent. She turned her back to me and waved to a man staring at her. I won't leave here until you dance with me, she replied, and I grunted. I did not want to dance, but I couldn't leave her amidst those men either. I moved closer to her and wrapped my arms around her waist. Okay, let's dance, I said to her, and saw her face light up. She was excited. Let's dance, she said after me and started swirling her waist gently as we moved with the beat. She turned and faced me, placing her 2 hands on my shoulder. She moved her body closer to me while I held her waist, and we continued dancing to the slow music that was being played in the bar. Everyone else was dancing, but it was like the space was just for the 2 of us, and I found myself enjoying the dance with her, and my heart started racing. You shouldn't be here, Nora. Have you forgotten that you are my Luna and you need to act like one? You are my mate, Nora, and you should act with respect. Why are you here? I asked her softly as we continued dancing, and she raised her head to look into my eyes. What? Thought you said I'm no longer your woman? You said you wanted a divorce. So why are you talking as if we are mates now? She asked, and I frowned. I wanted to refute her, but I knew she was right, so I kept quiet and continued dancing with her. Tell me, you don't love me anymore, right? She asked, and I frowned. I should be the one to ask you that question. You don't love me anymore, right? Well, have you ever loved me from the beginning, or have I always been a second choice for you? I asked her with curiosity in my voice. She was drunk, so she should be able to tell the truth. But she only laughed and shook her head. I don't think there is a need to talk about that, she said and stopped dancing. She staggered backward and threw her head to the side. Let's leave now. Let's go home, she said and tried leaving by herself, but I held her hand, and we walked out of the bar together. I led her to my car and helped her into a seat, closed the door, and walked toward the other side to enter. I glanced at her one more time before I started the car and drove away from the bar. During the drive to my mansion, I turned my head to look at her and realized she had her eyes closed, but I knew she wasn't sleeping. What are you thinking? I asked, trying to start a conversation, but she ignored me. Where did you go before coming here? I looked for you around the house, but you were nowhere to be found, I asked her, but she only shook her head, still ignoring me. I tried speaking to her more, but she kept ignoring me, and I sighed. I continued driving, and a few minutes later, we were home. It was already very late, so the mansion seemed empty, and I was sure Julius would be asleep too. I led her into the mansion and helped her up the stairs, taking her to our room. You should sit here first while I help you out of your dress, I said to her and was about to help her sit on the bed when she slumped, falling back flat on the bed while I fell on top of her. I frowned and tried to stand up, but she held me back and looked into my eyes. My handsome Madison, my handsome mate, she commented with amusement in her eyes and raised her head a little. She chuckled, but before I knew it, she planted a kiss on my lips, and my eyes widened. Thinking of standing up again, she kissed me once more, and this time, it was deep. Without thinking, I responded and kissed her back passionately. My hands roamed her waist up to her breast, and I fondled it gently, causing her to deepen the kiss as she pulled her body closer to me. I moved my hand from her breast down her belly and tried pulling up her gown, but I realized she was no longer responding to me, and I raised my head to look at her, only to realize that she had fallen asleep. I stood up and grunted. Lord Madison's POV. I woke up first the next morning and went to sit on the couch after taking a bath, while I stared closely at Nora, who was still lying in bed. Her messed up hair, her cute pout, and her beautiful face were alluring and giving me the urge to return to bed and kiss her succulent lips, but I knew that would be wrong. Different thoughts ran through my mind, but I kept them to myself and continued staring at her while she slept peacefully. About an hour later, she opened her eyes, rubbed her face, and yawned. She closed her eyes again and continued lying in bed for a few minutes longer before she sat up and stared at her body. She touched her lips, touched her breasts, and bent her back to look under her gown before she turned to look at me. "Did we do anything last night?" she asked, and I smirked. I stood up from the couch and walked toward her. "You want to know if we did something?" I asked as I climbed onto the bed. She was staring at me with questions in her eyes, but I pushed her, causing her to lay back in bed, and I climbed on top of her. "We kissed," I said, staring at her lips. She was horny. "So? You know what else, right? We had relation," I concluded, and she stared into my eyes for a while. She wasn't convinced, she knew it was a lie, but her body was violent, and she seemed to want me. She continued staring at me for a while before she finally grunted, bit her lower lip, and pushed me off her. "Liar! That was a lie. We didn't do anything," she said to me, and I chuckled. "I see you don't remember, but it's cool. I enjoyed it," I said. She rolled her eyes at me and scoffed. "What right do you have to touch me?" she asked, amusing me. "What do you mean? Have you forgotten our deal? It was for a month, and a month is not over yet." I replied to her, and she raised a brow. "That still holds?" she questioned, and I smirked. "Of course. You won't go back on your words, will you?" I asked, but she only rolled her eyes and turned to walk toward the bathroom. "You are not serious?" she said to me and entered the bathroom. I sat on the bed and laughed. She came out a few hours later with a towel tied around her chest while I stared at her. "Go, claim her right there," Darren said to me, but I shook my head. That would be wrong. I wanted to have her, but I knew she wasn't in the mood for that. I waited for her to dress up, and I cleared my throat. "Can we talk for a while?" "Sit, I want to tell you something," I said, and obediently, she sat down in front of the mirror and faced me. "What is it?" she asked. I sat down and looked at her, my expression becoming serious, but I was horny. "You were in the bar drinking all alone last night. You drank so much that you got drunk, and I had to come to your aid. I can't imagine what would have happened if I hadn't come on time yesterday. As a my queen, you shouldn't be seen in such a place," I said to her, but she only rolled her eyes and looked away. "Well, about how Julius has been treating you these days, I will talk to him and see if he will forgive you," I said, and her eyes widened. She ran over to my side and sat beside me. "Really? Will you talk to my son on my behalf?" she asked, excitedly, and I nodded. "The problem is between you and me, so I don't think Julius should be involved. I will speak to him myself and see if this can be resolved," I said, and with that, I stood up and left the room. I was on my way to Julius's room when Darren spoke up to me. "Why didn't you talk about your issue instead? Why didn't you bring up your marriage issue with her?" Darren questioned, and I rolled my eyes. "Why can't you both sit down and talk this out? Why can't you pull out this problem and apologize to each other? Are you two so big that you can't ask for forgiveness from one another?" Darren asked me with annoyance, and I groaned. "I shouldn't be the one apologizing, Darren. I've been apologizing for so long, and I think the one who needs to apologize this time around is Nora. She is the one who should apologize, not me," I replied. "Why are you doing this?" Why are you so stubborn and never listen to me? Darren questioned angrily and ended the connection between him and me, but I only sucked in a deep breath and continued walking toward Julius's room. I opened his door and found him dressing up by himself. He noticed my presence and ran toward me, giving me a big hug. "Good morning, Dad," he greeted, and we both walked back to his bed. I helped him with his shoes and planted a kiss on his forehead. "I hope you slept well?" I asked, and he nodded. "Yes, Dad. I did," he replied cheerfully, earning laughter from me. "Did you sleep well too?" he asked, and I nodded. "Yes, I did," I replied. He turned his head to look at the door, and his face fell when he realized no one was coming. I raised a brow and held his chin, making him look at me. "Are you waiting for your mother?" I asked, and he shook his head. "I'm not." He lied, and I smiled. "When you love your mother so much, why are you acting so cold toward her?" I asked, and he sucked in a deep breath. "I love my mother so much. She is the only mother I have, and I know she cares a lot about me. She is like my best friend and my best person," he said to me, and I sighed. "Exactly, you should stop being so angry at her. She hasn't been herself since you've been ignoring her. You know how much your mother loves you, and you are like her entire world. Don't you think it's time you accepted her back?" I asked, and he lowered his eyes. He nodded his head and looked at me. "I know what I've been doing is wrong, and Mum must have been sad a lot, but I was just angry. I was mad at her for keeping you away from me for so long, and I wanted to make her realize that what she did was very wrong. I guess I took it too far. I will make up with her and apologize for being so cold to her all this while," he said, and my heart melted. I had expected him to refuse to make up with her, and I had prepared myself to convince him until he would change his mind, but he made the whole thing easy for me, and I was glad. I opened my arms, and he smiled as he received my hug, and I hugged him tight. I kissed his hair. "I love you, my boy," I said as I broke the hug, and he sat back. "Okay, I should return to my work now. There is something I need to attend to in my study, but I will be back soon. If you need anything from me or need to see me, you can ask any of the maids to bring you to my study, okay?" I said to him, and he nodded. "Okay, Dad. I will do that," I said to him and stood up. I kissed his forehead one more time and waved my hand to him before leaving his room. I walked toward my study but stopped along the way as I could feel someone's presence there. It was a familiar scent, but then, it seemed unfamiliar too. Who could it be? I asked, but Darren refused to reply to me. I entered the study, and I was surprised to see that the person was Ava. "Ava! How long have you been here? I hope I didn't keep you waiting for so long. You should have come to the main mansion to look for me instead of staying here," I said with a welcoming smile on my face. The last time I saw her was when she helped us save Nora, and I had respected her since then. She stood up and sneered. "I'm here to tell you to keep your mate away from my man. Tell her to stay away from my mate. Alpha Leo is mine," she yelled, and I frowned. "Have you lost your mind? What rubbish are you spouting?" I asked her calmly, but I was already boiling inside. Why would she call my woman? "You heard me right, Lord Madison. I'm Alpha Leo's second chance mate, but Nora would not let us be," she explained, and my frown deepened. "What do you mean?" I questioned, and she groaned. "I saw her kissing Alpha Leo yesterday. Tell her to stay off, or I won't mind telling her off myself." She yelled, and I gasped. I couldn't believe my ears. Do you think she loves you? No, she is just playing with you. She is still in love with Leo and will never leave him. She has been deceiving you all this while, she continued talking, but I could hear no more. Angrily, I walked out of the study and went to my room, where I saw Nora applying makeup on her face. I grabbed her by the arms and pulled her up. What's your relationship with Leo? What do you have to do with him? I yelled at her with jealousy and pain. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.